If you haven't watched the previous video, which talks about diagnosing the types of discourses present in your school or district or community, please go back and watch that one. And then you can get to this one, which is you've diagnosed it, you know what's present and the types of discourses that are in your community. And now you're like, where do I go from here? How do I get from ones that are not generative and mobilizing to the generative mobilizing discourse quadrant? Let's get into that now. In the last video, we're trying to get here, and these are the places that we often end up. So if we have defined ourselves as being in one of these quadrants and we're trying to get to generative mobilizing discourse, Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick and myself have some ideas for you. So a lot of this is drawn from Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick's work. And so I just want to name that there are blog posts, there are podcast episodes on my blog and podcast, Time for Teachership, that have a lot more of Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick's words in the original. So I'll just kind of paraphrase here for you. When we look at some of the things that she talks about, she has found in her research the dialogic environment is critically important. This is the foundational piece. So we have this when we have highly developed racial literacy. We have the background information. We learn. We're constantly learning and growing. We have a sense of confidence or self-confidence that we are capable of learning and being adaptive on our feet. We have the ability to navigate tension, discomfort, and stress, and the ability to honor the dignity of every single person in the conversation as facilitators. So the quality of the facilitation of the conversation is critically important. So these are your team leads in whatever dimension that is. In a classroom environment, that is the teacher. In maybe a staff meeting, that is the PD leader or the principal, right? At a board meeting, right? That is the chair or the president of the board, right? Each of these pieces are critically important for everyone to develop. Now, the next piece is a readiness and a willingness. So she writes a lot about this, but in anti-racism work, there is no final destination. And so she says the first step toward anti-racism is acknowledging one's own complicity. It's an ongoing opportunity for conscious choice, and it's truly emotional. It challenges how we see ourselves. It requires some deeper work. And so that is critically important. Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick talks about doing our own work with accountability. So how do we remain accountable to the people that we need to be accountable for? And so in this work, it is often students and families, not necessarily the rich families or the families that are the loudest, or the students that are the loudest, or the students that have the most resources or connections, right? Thinking about who we're truly accountable to and for is important here. Number 3 is vulnerability. So again, just kind of scrolling down, these are excerpts from blog posts that you can read all about in detail. But as we work for racial justice and we think about vulnerability and what that means, it is far more likely when we have that dialogic environment built in the first place. White people avoiding racial justice pay a price, right? There is this overwhelming guilt or denial of personal values. There is kind of this sacrifice of not feeling fully whole and human and connected to people who have been racialized as Black or brown or something other than white, right? I think this is the thing that we often kind of otherize the value, where the value is for people who are not white, right? Racialized as white. I think that is the critical key that we need to get over that idea or work through that idea that white folks cannot be fully whole and human when we disconnect from conversations about race. And that is a huge piece of kind of this vulnerability work that Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick talks about. And so after getting feedback, I think another piece that's really important, she says, right, when we're being truly vulnerable in a positive way, we're taking a breath, and we're asking ourselves, is what I'm hearing true? Do I need clarity? Am I confused about something? And ultimately that this builds with practice. We get better at this as we do it more. So avoiding conversations is not truly helpful. And then the fourth piece is adaptability. We talk a lot about that on the YouTube channel, and talking about this, I think, is really, really important here because adaptability shows up in a lot of different ways in the policies that we have, in the assessments how we assess student work and student knowledge and capacity, in our pedagogies that we teach. But both thinking about this adaptive capacity, right? It is having the necessary skills to fill the gap that exists between who we want to be and how we're actually living, right? The aspired values, as Dr. Cherie Bridges-Patrick talks about, and living those values into existence. And so having that flexibility, having that adaptiveness allows for our imagination, which we talked about in the previous video. That is critical to getting to generative mobilizing discourse. And also that time for critical reflection making and recovering from mistakes, evaluation, and adjusting to new or different practices. So we've talked about a lot here. 4 capacities we can build, right? Building the dialogic environment. I have a ton of resources on that, and I've talked a lot about that in previous videos, but we want to make sure that we have the space that is perceived as safe as much as it can be by people who are part of the community, right? We want to, as facilitators, grow our capacity, and we want to grow the capacity of other people facilitating these conversations, right? We want to be adaptive and flexible and really reflect critically on our own beliefs, assumptions, values. We talk about those ideas a lot in adaptive leadership work. And we need that space to be able to do that work. And we want to do that work in community and also as individuals. We want to show up with vulnerability in all that requires and entails that we discussed. And we have to have a readiness and willingness to continue to learn, to make mistakes and recover from those mistakes. So a lot of this is deeply personal work. And then a lot of this is helpful to model as leaders for your staff and for your larger community. And then, of course, there are things that you can do to equip your staff, your students, your family, the community that you're part of, your family, right? All of the communities that we're always part of, to do this work more and to build up those capacities and to build up those spaces. And so as you think about this and the more you think about the practices involved and the activities or the things, it is a lot of individual, it is a lot of modeling, it is a lot of that. But there are also community things that we can do to bring ourselves together. And we get to this inflection point of high emotion, high things. We're close. Generative mobilizing discourse has those emotions, right? That's part of it. And we want to harness all of these skills that we just talked about to be able to get to that disequilibrium place, right? And to imagine and invite possibility. So let me know how it's going in the comments. Grab the free resource in the description. Best of luck.